The case of Dina Thompson. In the summer of 2022, the British media reported the release of one of the country's most dangerous criminals, 61-year-old Dina Thompson, known as the Black Widow. Today, I'll explain how she became infamous across the UK and why some people still fear her. Dina was born in 1960 in Hendon, a suburb of London. Her family was not poor, but barely made ends meet. Dina's father, a prison guard, was passionate about sports. He encouraged Dina to join a sports club, where she practiced gymnastics. He often participated in competitions and traveled abroad, often taking Dina with him. Dina grew up to be a cheerful and sociable girl, which made it easy for her to meet and connect with boys. After graduating from university, Dina found a job. In 1982, at the age of 22, she met a young man named Lee Wyatt on a date arranged by Lee's cousin. They felt a strong connection from the first meeting. 2 years later, in 1984, they married. After the wedding, they moved to Yapton, a small village in West Sussex, England, with a population of only 3,000. In Yapton, the Dana family welcomed a son, and Dina began working as a treasurer at a construction company. Meanwhile, Lee started a business selling designer stuffed toys, which they designed together. Their neighbors considered them a typical family. The neighbors did not have a close relationship with the Dina family. However, the attractive Dina often attracted the attention of local men. In 1991, the 31-year-old Dina met a local journalist named Julian Webb. He wrote articles about products sold in shops across West Sussex. Julian, 28, asked Dina to model clothes and display household items for money. She accepted his offer, and soon her picture appeared in the local newspapers. A month after Dina and Julian met, neighbors spotted them kissing near Julian's house. A few months later, Julian took Dina to his mother and expressed his desire to marry her. Julian's mother was surprised at how quickly things had progressed. She noted that Julian had met Dina in May, and by August, they were planning their wedding. Soon the whole village of Yapton knew about it. It was also known that Dina was still legally married to her first husband, Lee Wyatt. However, Lee had been missing for a long time at the time, and no one knew where he was. On the north coast of Cornwall, in the small resort town of Newquay, a young man named Colin Mitchell arrived and began looking for work at various entertainment venues. He was hired as a junior manager at an arcade. Colin provided his papers and explained that he had left West Sussex due to some problems. Initially, he appeared friendly and cheerful to everyone. However, it was soon realized that he was slightly deaf, which sometimes made communication difficult. As a result, the arcade staff often had to approach him and gently tap him on the shoulder to get his attention. It was soon realized that Colin Mitchell was his alias. His real name was Lee Wyatt. He explained that he had escaped trouble in West Sussex. Living with Dina in the village of Yapton, his wife was involved in toy manufacturing. Their most popular product was a leprechaun called Sean, who sold well both locally and outside the county. In the summer of 1991, Dina informed Lee that the Disney Corporation was interested in Sean the leprechaun and was willing to pay $50 million for the rights to the character. Dina then informed Lee that the mafia had found out about their arrangement and was threatening to kill the entire family unless they handed over most of their money. Dina convinced him that he needed to flee immediately to protect his family. Lee obtained documents under the name Colin Mitchell and traveled to Cornwall County. The decision to flee may have saved his life. However, the real threat was not from the mafia, as there had never been any deal with Disney. Dina made up the story and convinced her husband that it was true. While on the run, he lived in an unfamiliar city under a false identity as a homeless person. He worked and sent most of his earnings to his son, continuing to support the family. On November 2, 1991, Dina used her money to marry her second husband, journalist Julian Webb. Lee was away and unaware of the situation. Julian was overjoyed to marry Dina, believing she was now his. However, a few months after the wedding, Dina informed Julian that she was terminally ill and that her company was pressuring her to resign. 26,000 had gone missing from the accounts of the companies where Dina worked as treasurer, prompting the police to focus their investigation on her. Dina claimed that her first husband, Lee Wyatt, was responsible for the theft. She alleged that he had stolen the money and gone into hiding, but that he had now returned to their village of Yapton and threatened her. Dina produced threatening letters from Lee and shared recordings of phone calls in which he spoke of seeking revenge. She also alleged that he had come to her home and assaulted her. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Notably, a few months after Dina married Julian, Lee returned to Yapton when he learned of Dina's marriage. Lee created scandals involving Dina. The police believed Dina's accusations and began pursuing Lee, who went into hiding. The lies complicated Dina's life and the lives of the men involved with her. Julian had given Dina $25,000 from his savings to treat a terminal illness that she claimed was the reason she had lost her job. However, as the money began to run out, Julian began asking Dina about her progress. To his surprise, Dina had no medical documents to prove that she was actually ill or receiving treatment. On 30 June 1994, Julian celebrated his 300th birthday at home with his wife, Dana. In the evening, Julian's mother called, but Dina answered the phone and said that Julian was feeling unwell and unable to talk. The mother suggested that Dina call a doctor, but Dina did not follow this advice. That night, Julian died. Forensic experts concluded that he had died from a drug overdose, but they were unable to determine whether his death was a result of criminal activity. Dina insisted that Julian had chosen to end his life. When police questioned the neighbors, they learned that there had been unusual activity involving the couple 2 to 4 days before the tragedy. Dina and Julian had been arguing loudly about money, which surprised their neighbors, as they were not used to hearing arguments in Dina's household. Julian was generally considered a positive and cheerful person. The day after Julian's tragic death, Dina went to his workplace to ask about receiving $35,000 from his insurance policy. However, it is reported that she never received the money. In addition, their marriage was considered invalid because Dina was still the legal wife of her first husband, Lee Wyatt. Dina insisted on having Julian's body cremated, but his mother strongly opposed the decision. At Julian's funeral, Dina wore a black leather miniskirt and a revealing black blouse, showing no sign of grief. After Julian's death, she turned her home into a meeting place for men. Although many men visited her, none stayed for more than a day. In 1997, Dina officially divorced her first husband, Lee Wyatt, and won her freedom. The following year, she met Richard Thompson. Shortly after meeting him, Dina confided that she was battling breast cancer. Richard, who supported her, gave her all of his savings and promised to make the rest of her life enjoyable. They traveled from England to Florida, where Richard had a lavish wedding ceremony at a luxury hotel, with staff as witnesses. After the wedding, they moved to Brighton, East Sussex, on the south coast of England. Richard had always wanted to buy a boat and pursue a career in fishing. Dina encouraged him to take courses to start a yacht charter business for amateur fishermen, while Richard would take on the role of captain, helping beginners learn how to fish. 8 months after the wedding, Dina told her husband that she wanted to give him a special gift. On January 1st, 2000, they decided to take a shower together. Dina then asked if she could tie Richard up, and he agreed. She tied him up, gagged him, and covered his face with a towel. Richard then waited, confused, for what he thought was a prank. Suddenly, Dina hit him with a baseball bat, followed by another blow. Fortunately, Richard freed his hands and lunged at her. At that point, Dina grabbed a knife and stabbed him in the shoulder. Only then was Richard able to grab Dina and subdue her. Richard reported the incident to the police. Dina accused her husband of assaulting her, claiming that she acted in self-defense. The next day, a real estate staff came to Richard's house, expecting to meet Dina to sell real estate. Richard was surprised when he opened the door. When he saw the agent, Richard realized what was going on. He suspected Dina had planned to kill him, sell the house, and disappear, knowing that since he was going to America, no one would look for him during the trial. Dina drained Richard's bank account by forging his signature. She also accumulated a large debt on his credit cards. In addition, they reported other victims, former lovers of Dana, including businessmen, teachers, prison guards, and even a convicted felon. All of these men claimed that Dana manipulated them, demanding money and pretending to be seriously ill. Dana asked for money from many men. While some gave her money willingly, others had their accounts secretly drained by Dana. The truth about her first husband, Lee, was revealed. In 1991, Dana stole money from her workplace, where she worked as a cashier. At the time, she produced threatening letters allegedly written by Lee and played recordings of phone calls in which he spoke of possible revenge. However, in 2000, it was revealed that the letters and recordings were made while Lee was preparing to escape from a mafia organization. Dina had convinced him to do so in order to make people think he had disappeared and abandoned her. Lee believed this would protect him and their son from threats from the mafia. In 2000, a jury acquitted Dina Thompson in a case involving an alleged assault on her third husband, Richard Thompson. The judge described Richard as a paranoid attention seeker. Although Dina was cleared of the felony charge, she was convicted of 15 other counts of financial fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison. A strange incident involving her husband, coupled with complaints about her from multiple lovers, led to an investigation into Dina and the death of her second husband, Julian Webb. Dina gave conflicting accounts of what happened to Julian. She told her mother that he had sunstroke after drinking too much on his birthday and fell asleep in the sun. However, Julian's mother did not believe this story, knowing that he had always been healthy and rarely drank. She often urged Julian to leave Dina. Dina claimed to investigators that Julian had taken his own life, but those who knew him found this hard to believe, as he was usually cheerful and rarely had conflicts with anyone. To a former co-worker, Dina mentioned that Julian died from a steroid overdose to maintain his healthy physique, but this was also false. A friend of Dina's revealed that she had hinted at poisoning her second husband, Julian, by secretly adding the drug to Julian's favorite spicy food. The police tracked down the owner of a small restaurant where Julian frequently ordered. They recalled that on the day Julian died, Dina had gone to the restaurant and ordered rice with curry in a takeout box. Police speculated that the strong flavor of the curry may have effectively masked the bitter taste of the medication. In October 2001, 7 years after Julian's death, the investigation into his death continued. Julian's body was exhumed and sent for a re-examination. New tests, unlike the original ones, found higher levels of the drug in his system. It was discovered that he had been poisoned with a large dose of antidepressants, which Dina had mixed into Julian's favorite dish, curry rice. In addition, she had added a large dose of aspirin to the drink he had with his meal. On his birthday, when Julian's mother called to congratulate him, he was lying in bed, almost unconscious. At that point, there was still a chance to save him. The trial of 43-year-old Dina Thompson took place in 2003. A senior police officer said she was the most dangerous woman he had ever met. The judge also noted that Dina was one of the best prolific liars he had ever seen. In 2003, Dina Thompson was convicted of murdering her second husband, Julian Webb. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Dina's crimes were reported on numerous television shows, crime magazines, and newspapers, earning her the nickname the Black Widow. In 2010, police began investigating the disappearance of Stoyan Kostov, one of Dana's first lovers from Bulgaria. Dina and Stoyan were in a relationship from the late 1970s to the early 1980s. During her childhood, Dina and her father traveled to competitions in various countries, including Bulgaria. During one of these trips, Dina met a young man and they quickly became close friends. Stoyan's family mentioned a number of strange incidents involving him and Dina. After their brief relationship, the young man mysteriously disappeared and was never found, dead or alive. It is suspected that Stoyan may have been one of Dina's first victims. While in prison, Dana attended rehabilitation courses and worked with a psychologist. In 2021, the police investigating her case expressed concern about her chances of being released, stating that she would commit another crime. Dana would not be able to stop, as she showed no remorse. However, during her time in prison, she was considered a model prisoner and always spoke positively. Dina Thompson, 61, was released from prison in the summer of 2022. Upon her release, she must notify the police of any romantic relationships she has had. She is also banned from contacting her ex-husbands and other men affected by her actions. Dina must also wear a tracking bracelet to monitor her movements, abide by a curfew, and provide details of her banking transactions, if requested by the police. Richard Thompson, 63, who still lives in East Sussex, runs a property maintenance business. After learning of Dina's release, he expressed concern for his safety. Fully aware of what his ex-wife could do, he feared that his peaceful life was over. In July 2022, British newspapers published photos of Dina leaving a discount store carrying a large bag. Dina is now free to walk the streets of England. It is uncertain whether she has lured more victims or whether she has truly changed and chosen to live a better life. The case of Michelle O'Keefe. Michelle O'Keefe grew up in Hanford, California. Her parents, Michael and Patricia, were very proud of their two children. Michelle did well in school and pursued her dream of becoming an actress after graduating from high school. However, her bright future took a tragic turn in February 2000. On February 22, Michelle and her friend Jennifer traveled to Los Angeles to be extras in a music video. They arrived in separate cars and parked near a park. Michelle left her newly purchased blue Mustang and drove with Jennifer to Los Angeles. At 9:30 p.m., both girls returned to the park to pick up their cars and leave. Jennifer watched Michelle start the engine, turn on the headlights, and noticed that the taillights were on, indicating that Michelle was preparing to back up. As Jennifer drove down the street, she was surprised to see that the Mustang was not moving right behind her. Thinking that Michelle would soon catch up, Jennifer left the park and headed home. After that night, she would never see her friend again. That evening, a new security guard named Raymond Jennings, 25, began his shift at the park at 8:00 p.m. About an hour and a half into his shift, Raymond became alarmed and contacted his boss on the radio. He had heard an explosion coming from the west side of the parking lot, along with a car alarm. Raymond asked to call the police. Before the police arrived, they found a Ford Mustang parked in the center lane. The keys were still in the ignition, the engine and headlights were still on, and the manual transmission was in neutral. Inside the car, Michelle was sitting in the driver's seat. The deputy sheriff was the first to arrive on the scene. He determined that Michelle had died from her injuries. He also spoke with Raymond. When asked if he saw anyone leave the parking lot immediately after the explosion, Raymond replied that he did not see anyone get out after hearing the alarm and the explosion. Raymond then pointed to the shell casings, indicating that the bullets were found from the location of the Mustang. The driver's door was open, and the window was partially rolled down. A pair of black jeans was on the passenger seat. One of Michelle's shoes was on her right foot, while the other was on the ground. Police also found a gold earring on the ground. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office found that 5 shots were fired from the same 9mm gun. Police investigated, and there was no evidence that Michelle had any enemies. Her closest friend said she had no problems with her boyfriend, and could not identify anyone who wanted to harm her. Police considered the possibility that Michelle was the victim of a robbery or attempted carjacking, especially since her cell phone was missing. The last call she made was to her friend Jennifer, just minutes before she got into the car. It is likely that the killer took her cell phone, but her wallet and $100 were still in the car, found between the center console and the driver's seat. Jennifer said, Michelle felt uncomfortable going to college that night in the outfit she wore in the music video because it was a little revealing. She planned to change her clothes before returning to campus. Raymond told police 3 times that he did not see anyone else in the parking lot at the time of the crime, making him the prime suspect. Raymond is a father of 5 and has served in the California National Guard. He was working toward becoming a U.S. Marshal. As a key witness in the murder investigation, Raymond was eager to assist. Police invited him to the station for interviews several times, which he gladly accepted. During the interviews, his statements seemed inconsistent and lacked credibility compared to what had already been established. Raymond said that when he arrived at the crime scene, Michelle was still alive. He claimed that her hands were moving or twitching, which made him think she was not dead. However, the medical examiner's findings contradicted Raymond's testimony. Michelle died instantly from her injuries. Police identified Raymond as the prime suspect, largely based on the belief that he was the only person present in the parking lot during the crime. 2 weeks after the murder, a woman named Victoria told police that she and 4 people in her car had witnessed the murder. At the time of the murder, Victoria was in the parking lot listening to loud music. She and her friends heard an explosion. Just before the explosion, Victoria noticed a security guard walking past her parked car toward Michelle. After hearing the explosion and the car alarm, she and her friends left the parking lot and found Michelle dead in the car. As they left, Victoria spoke to the security guard and asked him what had happened. He said that have heard gunshots, prompting the entire group to leave the parking lot. Police believe Raymond was the person seen near the Mustang at the time of the murder. Raymond later cooperated with the investigation, participating in an interview and agreeing to take a lie detector test, which he ultimately failed. At this point in the investigation, police believed they had identified the killer, but they lacked concrete evidence. The murder weapon had disappeared from the scene, and there was no physical evidence linking Raymond to the crime. Although Raymond legally owned a semi-automatic pistol, it was not the weapon used in the murder, stalling the investigation for years. During this time, Michelle's family hired a private investigator, determined to find justice for Michelle. While the case was still under investigation, Raymond was deployed to Iraq. Upon his return 5 years later, he was arrested for Michelle's murder. Unable to post his $1 million bail, he remained in custody for nearly a year, while the prosecution and defense prepared for trial. A devoted father of 5 and twice married, most of Raymond's family lived in North Carolina, but he had moved to California for better job opportunities. He considered himself a devout man and had helped a friend distribute Christian music CDs. Despite these qualities and his lack of criminal record, he was now charged with murder. During the trial, the defense pointed to the lack of forensic evidence linking Raymond to the crime. Raymond's DNA was not found in the car or on Michelle, and DNA found under her fingernails did not match his. There were no fingerprints, gun residue, or blood evidence linking Raymond. His car was searched for weapons, none were found. He resigned from his position as a park ranger shortly after the incident. While on patrol, he was approached by 2 men who threatened him and asked if he was the guard on duty the night of the murder, which made him feel unsafe and prompted him to resign. He returned his uniform, which was later turned over to the police by the security guard. However, the lab report found that the uniform was simply dirty and that Raymond had not even attempted to wash it before returning it. Importantly, the uniform showed no blood, gunpowder, or other physical evidence implicating Raymond in the shooting. Victoria testified that she had seen a security guard next to the Mustang in the parking lot. The prosecution exaggerated this testimony, claiming that Raymond had been at the scene of the murder just minutes before the shooting. After a week of deliberations, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision and announced that the trial would be retried. In February 2009, a second trial took place in California, but the jury again failed to reach a unanimous decision. This time, however, 11 jurors voted to convict, while only one juror dissented. Michelle's murder had been widely reported in the media for many years. Victoria was deemed ineligible to attend because she was serving time for other crimes, so her testimony was read in court. In December 2009, a third jury found Raymond Jennings guilty of second-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, Michelle's family pleaded with the judge to impose the maximum sentence on the killer. Michelle's younger brother, who had confronted Raymond at his home after many years, urged him to take responsibility for his actions. Raymond responded by declaring his innocence. Raymond found peace in his life because he felt no guilt. He did not kill Michelle. Raymond was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Nearly 10 years into his sentence, Raymond still maintained his innocence, but his appeals had run out. He sought help from the state's Innocence Project, but progress was slow, and without new key evidence, it seemed unlikely that Raymond would be released for years. Raymond's situation improved when civil defense attorney Jeff Ehrlich took on Raymond's case in 2011. After reviewing all the evidence from 3 trials and police records, Jeff concluded that Raymond had been wrongly convicted. They acknowledged that the original investigation was flawed and decided to gather new evidence by consulting with their own experts. They submitted their findings to the newly formed Sentencing Review Unit. A key piece of evidence was the report that the lack of gunpowder residue on Raymond's jacket cuffs suggested he was not the killer. Ballistics evidence shows the 9mm weapon used to kill Michelle is similar to the weapon used by Bloods gang members in recent shootings. Victoria's social media posts suggest she was involved with the Bloods. In the years following Michelle's murder, Victoria had a history of violent crimes. She was arrested several times for assault with a weapon, one of which resulted in her boyfriend, Andrew, being convicted. At the time of Michelle's murder, Andrew was also a member of the Bloods. 4 months after the murder, he was involved in robberies, including the theft of a Ford Mustang. He used the same weapon used to kill Michelle. When Andrew was arrested in June 2000, he was wearing an earring that matched the description of an earring that belonged to Michelle that was missing from the crime scene. However, Andrew was never questioned about Michelle's murder, and the identities of the people in the SUV with Victoria were never determined. On January 23, 2017, a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge overturned Raymond's conviction, finding him innocent. He served 11 years. In March 2017, the state of California awarded him more than $538,000 in damages. Michelle's family was disappointed that the jury's verdict against Raymond could be easily overturned by a newly formed unit. However, the appeals court upheld the judge's decision. The family continues to struggle after losing Michelle. A few years later, they lost their son to a drug overdose. The couple is now divorced. They have suffered the loss of 2 children and also lost their only source of comfort, knowing that Michelle's killers are in prison. The investigation into her case continues. The case of Benno Numer. In today's story, we focus on the Numer family, who live in Balna, a city in northern Italy. The family consists of parents Peter Numer and Laura Perselli. Their son Benno is 30 years old, and their daughter Maid is 27 years old. Benno is a doctor who has completed his university education and is dedicated to fitness. His father, Peter, is 63 years old, and his mother, Laura, is 68 years old. Both retired from teaching at school. Despite their age, they are still active in social and cultural activities. The family is respected in the community. On January 4, 2021, Laura and Peter suddenly disappeared. They were last seen that morning when they went to the supermarket. Laura was planning to visit her mother, who had just returned home from the hospital. Laura rode her bike to her mother's house. A few hours later, Laura's sister sent her a short video of their sick mother, but Laura never opened the message. At the same time, Laura's daughter Maid was on vacation with a friend outside the city and sent her mother a photo but received no response. Benno called his mother at 8:30 that evening, but she did not answer. 3 minutes later, he sent a voice message to his girlfriend, Martina, expressing his concern that he had not been able to reach his parents. He told her that he would be at her house in about an hour or two for dinner as planned, and that he would be late. Benno asked her to call him back later on a regular phone line instead of WhatsApp because he did not have an internet connection. Martina called him back shortly afterwards, and they arranged to meet at 10:12 p.m. When Benno arrived at her house in his father's car, he said he had forgotten to shower. He went to wash his face and asked Martina if she could do his laundry. She didn't ask any questions and agreed to help. Benno gave Martina a bag full of dirty clothes. She didn't check the contents and threw them in the washing machine. The couple then had a great evening at the bar and a passionate night at her house. Benno didn't leave his girlfriend's house until 5:30 a.m. When he was with her at around 11 p.m., he sent his mother a short text message wishing her a good night. He noticed that she hadn't read it, but he was too busy that evening to think about it. Early in the morning of January 5, Laura's sister came to her house. She knocked on the door and rang the bell, but there was no response. It was clear that no one was home. Laura's sister was worried and called Benno to ask about Laura and Peter. However, Benno said he was not home and did not know where they were. Laura's sister was busy taking care of her sick mother and could not leave her alone, so she asked Benno to try to find them. Benno promised to help and suggested that their parents might have gone to the mountains, as they often did. He advised them to wait a few days. Meanwhile, Laura's daughter, Maid, was at the resort with her friend and boyfriend. She noticed that her messages had been ignored, which made her suspicious. She called her dad and was surprised when he didn't answer. His social media pages also showed unread messages, and she couldn't reach her parents, which made her even more worried. So Maid called her brother Benno, who said he was walking his dog in the mountains a few kilometers away from their parents' house, and he couldn't check on them. He seemed worried throughout the call, and his story sounded strange. The dog was very old and sick, barely moving even in their yard, so it was hard to believe he could hike several kilometers into the mountains with the dog. Unable to get more information from Benno, Maid decided to ask a neighbor who lived next door to her parents for help around 1:30 p.m. The neighbor was home, so she agreed to check on her parents. The neighbor knocked on the door, and Benno opened it. At that time, the neighbor was still on the phone with Maid. She immediately recognized her brother's voice and was surprised that he had just refused her request to check on her parents. Benno explained that he had rushed back to his parents' house after walking the dog and was now home. Benno said that their parents were not home and insisted that he did not know where they had gone. Maid called all the hospitals in the city because she had a strong feeling that something was wrong with her parents. Eventually, Maid stopped her outing and returned home. She asked Benno if he knew what had happened to their parents, but he said he did not know. He explained that he had spent the previous day with his girlfriend and had only returned home in the morning when their parents were no longer there. Feeling desperate, Maid decided to contact the police to report her parents missing. At this point, Benno began to discourage her from calling the police. He seemed to be stalling for time, but he suggested another approach that he thought would be more effective. So he contacted a friend who was a police officer for advice on how to handle the situation. Benno's friend suggested contacting a search and rescue service that specialized in mountain rescue, but that didn't help either. In the end, May decided to go to the police himself, regardless of whether Benno supported her decision or not. He eventually agreed, and they went to the police station together. The young man told them about his parents' disappearance and suggested that they might have gone into the mountains. He mentioned that an avalanche had occurred in the area they frequented about a day after they left. He believed that his mother and father might have been buried under the snow. This explanation seemed plausible to the police and became the main focus of the investigation. Laura and Peter were declared missing, and search teams were deployed to the site of the avalanche. Trained dogs were used to search. Despite a thorough search, it took a long time to cover the entire area. The police decided to interview Benno to gather more information. They noticed that he was evasive and increasingly uncomfortable when asked difficult questions, making his behavior seem suspicious. After leaving the office, Benno suddenly displayed a sudden and inexplicable aggression. He attributed this outburst to hunger, fatigue, and stress. The next day, there was still no news from the police about Peter and Laura, prompting Maid to return to the station. Benno tried to stop her again, insisting that the police needed more time to conduct the search. During this time, another girl named Jasmine contacted Benno. It turned out he was chatting with 3 other people on Tinder, and he was particularly interested in Jasmine, and he showed little interest in the ongoing investigation. On January 6, Maid returned to the police station. It had been 2 days since her parents had gone missing. Laura and Peter had not contacted her, which made her believe that something had happened to her parents. They usually informed her before they went into the mountains and would prepare carefully for such trips. She felt the need to conduct a more thorough search of the area near their home. The police were actively involved from the beginning. Initially, they focused on the possibility that the couple had gone missing in the mountains. During this time, Benno went to the supermarket with his new girlfriend, Jasmine, where he bought a large amount of hydrogen peroxide, explaining that he needed it to prepare to sell his father's car. Search teams along with volunteers were organized to search the areas outside the mountains and around Laura. Despite the large resources and the participation of about 600 people in the search effort, Peter and Laura were still missing. Everyone worked together in the hope of finding them quickly. Finally, Maid expressed her concerns. She thought about Benno's strange behavior and the fact that their parents had disappeared shortly after she left the city for a short time. During that time, Benno was supposed to be with them, and their relationship was complicated. She suspected that he might know more than he was letting on. The police decided to question Benno again. This time, during questioning, he was overly friendly, which was surprising given his violent reaction after his previous encounter with the police. The officers suspected that he was deliberately controlling his demeanor to avoid revealing any important information. During this time, suspicions grew that Peter and Laura were likely dead, and it was believed that the couple's son, Benno, might be involved. Benno became the prime suspect. Maid regularly contacted the police, sharing information about Benno and their parents. Benno's behavior was often so rude and aggressive that Laura was afraid to be home alone with him. On January 7, the police tracked Benno down. That day, Jasmine and Benno got into the family car and went to a hardware store where they bought rags, cleaning supplies, a bucket, and hydrogen peroxide. While Benno asked Jasmine to pay for the items, they stopped at a car wash before heading home. The police arrested them there and found all the items they had purchased in the trunk of the car. The car was impounded for further investigation. The police also attempted to confiscate Benno's jacket, but he refused to hand it over. Benno was questioned again that day. Ultimately, he did not provide any useful information, and since there was no evidence against him, he was released. Although the police confiscated the cleaning kit, Benno and Jasmine decided to clean the house. Benno asked her to wear the jacket the police had asked to confiscate. She did not suspect anything and agreed. After a short while, he took the jacket off Jasmine and put it away. Later that day, the police arrested Jasmine, thinking she might be involved in the case. They questioned her for hours about Peter and Laura's disappearance, but could not find any evidence to link her to the crime. Jasmine is later confronted by the Carabinieri police several times during interrogation, including when Benno's jacket is confiscated. Her hair and skin particles are found on the jacket, forcing her to prove her innocence. She explains that she helped Benno clean the house and wore the jacket, but she was unaware of the implications and risk of harm to herself. On January 17, Maid returns to her parents' house and finds Benno there. She decides to voice her suspicions, which leads to an altercation between them. Maid suggests that Benno may be involved in Peter and Laura's disappearance. He becomes hysterical, shaking as he tries to convince her that she is mistaken. He eventually swears that he had nothing to do with it. Despite his assurances, she remains suspicious of Benno, knowing he is a good liar. Benno tries to justify his actions. However, Maid knew about his troubled relationship with their parents and his aggressive nature. He was the only one capable of causing harm to their loved ones. On January 18, Benno was the prime suspect in the case. The police suspected that he had killed his parents and then hidden their bodies. But the police lacked solid evidence. They only found a small bloodstain on the car, not enough to confirm the death of his parents. However, the investigation continued. Important information came to light when Benno's phone was confiscated and examined. Geolocation data from the phone was examined on the evening when Peter and Laura went missing. The data showed that Benno had left the city and stopped near the bridge on the Adige River, where he stayed for a considerable amount of time. The police believed that he may have dumped their bodies there. This location became the focus of the search for evidence. On February 6, 2021, a search operation was launched in the Adige River. Police quickly located Laura's body. However, her husband, Peter, had been missing for more than 3 months. He was finally found on April 27, after Laura's body was discovered on the riverbank. A brown stain that looked like blood was found on the bridge over the river. Forensic experts analyzed the sample and confirmed that it was Peter's blood. Surveillance camera footage captured Benno's car on the evening of the incident as he returned from the bridge to his ex-girlfriend Martina's house, confirming that he was at the scene where the bodies were found. Peter's body was found by forensic experts in relatively good condition. A layer of algae had formed on it, slowing down decomposition, and the cold temperature helped preserve the tissues. This made it easy to spot signs of strangulation on both Peter and his wife. Marks on their necks indicated that they had been attacked from behind. The cause of death was confirmed to be strangulation, and it was determined that they had been thrown into the river after they were dead, as there was no water in their lungs. Given Benno's strong and muscular physique, he was able to overpower his elderly parents without much difficulty. After his parents' bodies were found, Benno admitted that he was involved in their deaths. On the night of the incident, he had an argument with Peter. Benno tried to avoid the argument by locking himself in his room, but his father barged in and continued the argument. In a fit of rage, Benno attacked his father with a rope and strangled him. When Laura heard the noise and went upstairs, he feared that she would call the police, so he strangled her as well. Although his confession seemed credible, his motives seemed too weak to justify such a brutal act. Benno explained that his relationship with his parents had become increasingly strained in the months leading up to the incident, marked by frequent arguments after he moved back in with them. Benno had begun paying rent at his father's request. However, due to the constant arguments, his father decided that it would be best if Benno moved out. He began to encourage his son to rent his own apartment, but Benno refused. To pressure him to move, his father increased the rent to €700, which Benno considered excessive and unfair. That evening, Peter called him a loser for spending too much time on the computer and forced him to walk the dog. Another argument broke out. This conflict escalated into a tragic situation. Benno claims that his father was the first to confront him, trying to kick him out of the house. As a result, Benno felt he had no choice but to defend himself. The investigation revealed that immediately after the murder, Benno began to create an alibi. He called his mother's cell phone, pretending to go looking for her. After the murder, he asked Martina to wash his clothes to erase any evidence. Although she handed the washed clothes over to the police, no incriminating marks were found on them. Police believe that his efforts to conceal the evidence indicate a deliberate act. Not only did Benno understand what he was doing, but he also tried to avoid consequences for this brutal crime. Benno attempted to explain his actions by claiming that he was mentally disturbed and affected by the attack. However, his calm demeanor and careful efforts to conceal evidence of the crime showed that he was fully aware of his actions. After his arrest, psychiatrists evaluated him and determined that he had a personality disorder characterized by narcissism and social problems. He had recently had frequent sudden outbursts of anger, which doctors attributed to his steroid use. Benno began taking additional medication. This led to a significant deterioration in his mental state due to hormonal changes, leading to increased aggression and a complete loss of self-control. Maid said that he would often attack her when angry and was often violent with other family members. On one occasion, she suffered multiple bruises as a result of his aggression. Even as a child, Benno tried to strangle her, but their parents were present at the time. In 2020, Benno entered a relationship with a girl named Nadine, and they moved to Germany together. A friend noted that at first, Benno was very attentive and caring. However, over time, his behavior became controlling, showing signs of selfishness and abusive tendencies. He tried to create distance between Nadine and her family, isolating her from her parents and friends, leaving her to spend most of her time alone. Things got worse when in June 2020, Nadine discovered that Benno had used her credit card without permission and stolen money from her account. This betrayal prompted Nadine to end the relationship. She called Benno's parents and insisted that they pick up their son from her apartment. His parents had to drive to pick him up. Just a day after their return, Benno made amends with Nadine, promising to pay her back and asking her parents to let him go home to Nadine. While Nadine was at work, he sent her a selfie showing him covered in blood. Benno claimed he had gotten into a fight with a friend named Dean. However, Dean was in another part of town at the time and did not see Benno. Benno sent some of the photos to his mother, Laura, who was concerned. She contacted a friend for advice. The friend suggested that Benno could be dangerous and advised Laura not to go to his apartment alone. Laura suspected that Benno's mental health had deteriorated due to his use of anabolic steroids. Benno was eventually taken away, and it was discovered that he had been self-harming due to hallucinations. After this incident, Nadine decided not to see him again, but he was discharged after only 3 days. During his stay, doctors did not have enough time to carry out all the necessary tests to diagnose his condition. It was suspected that Benno was schizophrenic, and his family insisted on further testing, but he refused and began taking medication for schizophrenia. By the time Benno's trial began, he had been diagnosed with acute polymorphic psychotic disorder rather than schizophrenia. This misdiagnosis meant that he was taking the wrong medication, which likely worsened his mental condition. While on steroids, he was taking a dangerous cocktail of drugs that affected his behavior. Immediately before the murder, Benno was released from the psychiatric hospital and returned home. During this time, his mother became extremely concerned for his safety. She hid all the knives in the house and locked the doors at night. She believed that as long as she did not provoke him, everything would be fine, so she tried to avoid arguments and limit her interactions with him. Unfortunately, this did not protect her from a tragic end. On November 19, 2022, Benno Numer was sentenced to life in prison. However, his lawyer quickly appealed the decision, arguing that Benno was insane due to a combination of negative factors that worsened his mental condition. To support the defense's claims, several independent medical assessments were conducted, which found him mentally stable. The prosecution pointed out that Benno acted deliberately, as he tried to create an alibi and conceal his actions. Just minutes after the murder, he called his girlfriend, pretending to be worried about his parents' absence. He ruthlessly deceived those around him, sending messages to his deceased mother, deceiving his sister and neighbors, all to escape justice. After the retrial, Benno's life sentence was upheld and remains in effect. The murders of Peter and Laura received considerable media attention in Italy and caused widespread public fear. The case of Eve Stratford. Eve Stratford was born on December 28, 1953, in Dortmund, West Germany, to parents Albert and Liza Stratford. Her mother was German, while her father was a British doctor who met in the 194 Eros. The family traveled the world, eventually settling in Aldershot, a small town in southeast England. Her younger brother was also born there. During her childhood, Eve won 3 beauty contests and dreamed of becoming a model who would feature on a popular magazine cover. In 1972, at the age of 18, Eve met Tony Priest, a young musician and lead singer of a band called Onyx. They believed that moving to London would boost their chances of success. In 1973, Eve, Tony, and 3 other band members relocated to Leighton in East London. They rented a 4-bedroom flat and lived together. Due to their limited finances, they struggled to make ends meet and slept on old mattresses on the floor instead of beds. Eve Stratford had the ambition to succeed in the modeling industry. Shortly after moving to London, she found a job at the Playboy Club in Park Lane, thanks to a friend's recommendation. She quickly became popular with the club's wealthy clientele, which included millionaires, politicians, celebrities, and even individuals in the criminal underworld. She also became a favorite of the club's owner, Victor Oberlans. All the waitresses at the club wore velvet and bow ties to serve the most prestigious guests in London. At work, Eve introduced herself as Eve Von Bach, or Eve Bunny. She proudly shared photos of herself with comedians Eric Morecambe and Sid James, as well as a photo with boxing champion John Conti. She mailed these photos to her parents and felt proud of herself, but she always dreamed of more. In 1975, at the age of 21, Eve applied to be a Playboy cover model, but was rejected. However, fortune smiled upon her when she received an invitation to pose for the cover of Mayfair, Playboy's British rival. Adopting the pseudonym Eve Von Bach, she appeared topless on the cover, and inside the magazine there were 9 pages of interviews with her, along with a large poster of her completely naked. The March 1975 issue of Mayfair sold 460,000 copies, mostly to men. They called Eve the classic blonde. In a 9-page interview, she shared her preferences in love, admitting that she liked being submissive to a strict man. However, she stressed that she did not like being tied down or punished. She enjoyed seducing men and watching their excitement. She admitted that she often flirted and teased men, which made her feel happy. She also said that she liked both men and women. In the interview, she misled readers by saying that she lived alone with a cat, which sometimes made her feel sad and lonely. The nude photo shoot made Eve's boss, Victor Oberlans, very angry. He suspended her from her job as a waitress for 3 months, but she was not too worried about this. She was aware that she had violated her contract by working for Playboy's competitors. In a discussion with her manager, Aaron Morris, she confessed that her dream was to become a model and that she was doing everything she could to achieve that goal. She said that she did not want to serve rich men forever and was not afraid of losing her job as a waitress at the Playboy Club. She hoped that her appearance on the cover of Mayfair would lead to new job opportunities and help her advance her career. She believed that in the next 3 months, she would not need to return to the Playboy Club. Eve had no idea what was coming next. By then, her boyfriend, Tony's band, had completely disbanded. Although after moving to London, The group has performed as an opening act for famous bands such as Queen and T-Rex. But then, Tony and a friend, a former band member, had to work as forklift drivers. The other two members joined another band and left them. After Eve was suspended from her job, she spent the day in their rented apartment. Soon, she received two job offers, one for a photo shoot with a South African magazine and another as a model for a crime fiction magazine cover, in which she played a victim with a knife stuck in her throat. On Tuesday, March 18, 1975, Eve met with her manager. Then she visited a company that promoted stars on the BS Water show. At 15:50, she returned home by subway. On the way, she stopped at a flower shop and bought a bunch of dried flowers wrapped in a plastic bag. She arrived home around 4:10 p.m. About 20 minutes later, the neighbor downstairs heard a man and a woman talking in her apartment, and their conversation seemed calm. About an hour later, at 5:15 p.m., the downstairs neighbor suddenly heard a loud noise. She thought someone might have dropped a chair. Then she heard the sound of someone leaving Eve's apartment and coming down the stairs. Just 10 minutes later, Eve's boyfriend, Tony, returned home with a friend and discovered a horrifying scene. His girlfriend, Eve Stratford, was lying on a mattress in the bedroom. Her throat had been cut so deeply that her head was nearly severed from her body. Her hands were bound behind her with a scarf, and her ankles were tied with stockings. She was wearing a pink bra, panties, and a blue nylon housecoat that was open in the front. Tony immediately called the police. The officers and detectives who arrived described it as one of the most gruesome scenes they had ever encountered. Upon examining the apartment, they found no signs of forced entry, indicating that Eve had likely let her attacker in. There were no signs of a struggle, and everything was in its usual place. The crime scene was filled with a disturbing, overpowering smell. Forensic experts later determined that she had been stabbed between 8 to 12 times in the neck. Additionally, they found semen from a strange man on her body. Police thoroughly searched the area around the house, including gardens, garbage bins, and drains, looking for evidence, but they did not find the murder weapon. The only thing they found was a torn magazine lying on the grass, with a picture of Eve on the cover. Detectives believe that the killer saw her picture in the magazine, found her address, and followed her to commit the terrible acts. Witnesses confirmed that Eve was walking alone from the metro station to her apartment, with the last person to see her being a neighbor. She was wearing a small hat and carrying a bag of dried flowers. The bouquet was found inside the apartment near the front door. There were drops of blood on the bag, proving that she had encountered the killer shortly after entering the house. Investigators noted that the dried flowers matched those in Eve's magazine photos. They also considered the possibility that the killer was a secret lover of Eva's, whom she had invited to her apartment. However, they considered this unlikely, as she knew that her boyfriend Tony could come home at any time. Based on witness accounts, a composite sketch of the suspect was created. Several people reported seeing an unknown man near her house. Witnesses described him as being between 30 and 40 years old, of average height, with a limp and a flushed face. One witness also said that the man had thick, curly black hair. Detectives interviewed two well-known celebrities who frequently interacted with Eve at the club. Their identities were not released, and there was no evidence to suggest they were involved in the crime. Waitresses from the club where Eve worked were also questioned, with some reporting receiving indecent phone calls the day before the tragedy. On the day of Eve's death, she received 3 mysterious phone calls. Each time she answered, there was silence on the other end, and then the call was disconnected. She had previously told friends that she felt she was being followed by a strange man near her home. She knew nothing about him, but remembered that his gait was tense and awkward. After the tragedy, Mayfair editor David Brenner refused to speak to the police. He only answered their questions by phone, and claimed that he had never met Eve in person. Another individual involved in the case was Lebanese businessman Abdullah Kawaj, who dined at the Playboy Club daily. He had feelings for Eve and referred to her as his girlfriend. It is reported that they had a very close relationship and that Abdullah was involved in the criminal world. A waitress said that when she informed Abdullah of Eve's death, he cried at the table. He became one of the suspects, and this made him feel uncomfortable because people around him had discovered his secret relationship with Eve. A few months after Eve's murder, a man reported to the police that he had rented a flat to two people. When they moved out and he began cleaning, he found a newspaper clipping about Eve's murder in the closet. The clipping was stained with a woman's lipstick. He also found a photograph of Eve stabbed in several places with needles. Unfortunately, the evidence collected did not help the police solve the case. The murder weapon was never found, and as time passed, the likelihood of finding and punishing the perpetrator diminished. Eve's murder attracted a great deal of media attention. Londoners mourned her death, but there were also those who believed that she deserved it because of her promiscuous lifestyle. Some even showed their disdain by vandalizing her grave multiple times. Eve's parents were harassed with obscene phone calls, leading to a nervous breakdown for her mother, Liza. Meanwhile, on September 3, 1975, another girl, Lynn, was murdered in a different part of London. She was only 16 years old when the incident occurred. She was attacked from behind with a hard object to the head and then sexually assaulted. She was born on November 11, 1958. She was a good, diligent girl who had just graduated from high school and was planning to go to college to become a secretary. She was fluent in English, German, and French. On September 3, Lynn was returning home from a cafe where she had spent time with friends. She said goodbye to them around 11:00 p.m. and decided to take a shortcut through a dark alley. She had previously stated that she would never go into that area at night because she knew there were many homeless people there. However, that night, she decided to take a shortcut through that alley. Around 11:20 p.m., as she walked through the alley, she was struck on the head with a heavy object, likely a metal pipe, which resulted in a fractured skull. The attacker then threw her body over a fence into the grounds of an electrical substation to avoid detection. He assaulted she and left, leaving behind traces of his DNA on her body. The next morning, a local security officer discovered Lynn just a few minutes' walk from her home. When the scene was searched, no murder weapon was found. Despite her severe injuries, she was still alive but unconscious. She was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, she died a week later. The police quickly launched an investigation and discovered a witness who was walking his dog around the time Lynn was attacked. He reported seeing a white man in the dark alley. Another witness mentioned seeing a man running through the alley. Although they all described the same individual, police were unable to find a suspect. Initially, police believed she was attacked by a friend of European origin. However, upon further investigation, they discovered that it was likely that her attacker had been stalking and lying in wait for her for several hours before carrying out the attack. Despite extensive investigation, police have not found any significant clues, and the case remains unsolved. On September 9th, 1977, nearly 2 years after Lynn's death, another murder took place. 27 years old Elizabeth Paravancina was killed just 1.5 kilometers from where Lynn was attacked. Police immediately suspected that the two cases were related. Like Lynn, Elizabeth was walking home late at night on the same street, but in a slightly different direction. She was almost home when she was suddenly attacked from behind with a blunt object. He then dragged her body into the bushes. However, there were no signs of a struggle on her body. Police suspected that the perpetrator panicked about something, causing him to run away without leaving a trace. Witnesses reported a strange man in the area, and a composite sketch was created. But this did not help solve the case. Over time, several more crimes occurred with no suspects identified. Despite attempts to link the cases, only a few common features were found. By 2004, with the advancement of science and DNA testing, Eve's case was linked to Lynn's. The DNA from sperm found in both victims was identical, indicating they were attacked by the same man, 6 months apart. Police now believe that both murders were committed by a serial killer who remains at large because his DNA is not in prison databases. The investigations into the cases of Eve and Lynn have been reopened. Police collected DNA samples from all suspects, including those who are deceased. For example, Abdullah's DNA was taken through his son, but no match was found. In 2015, on the 40th anniversary of Eve's murder, police appeared on television appealing for information and offering a $50,000 reward for information that could lead to the capture of her killer. Crucially, prior to 1995, DNA was not collected from people who had been in prison. This means that the perpetrator may have been arrested and imprisoned for other crimes before. It is possible that he shared information about his crimes with someone. Police have sought information from psychiatrists, inmates, and prison guards regarding the girls' murders. In 2020, former officer Chris Clark claimed that serial killer Peter Sutcliffe was responsible for at least 30 additional cold cases, including Eve's murder. In an exclusive interview shortly after Peter's death, Chris stated that while reviewing information on Peter's cases, he noticed many similarities in methods and motives. Peter was convicted in 1981 for 13 murders and 7 attempted murders. Before his arrest, he was married and worked as a truck driver, frequently traveling across England. It was discovered that he had been in the vicinity of Eve's home for a relative's wedding. The wedding took place on Saturday, March 22, 1975, just 4 days after Eve was murdered. At that time, Peter was 29 years old. Peter was in London during the week Lynn was killed. He was staying in a house in North London, about 6.5 kilometers from the site of Lynn's attack. Peter died in 2020 at the age of 74. Unfortunately, the police were unable to collect a full blood sample before his death. Currently, the national database only has swabs from his mouth and hair. His records indicate he is likely responsible for multiple attacks on women from 1969 to the 1980s. Aside from the 20 proven cases, the remaining cases are just police speculation. Joshua had no previous problems with the law, was known to be a model student, an excellent athlete, and was generally well-liked. The party took place in southern Oklahoma, while the murder took place in Texas. As a result, they had to appear in court in Texas, where the crime could result in the death penalty. After being pressured by the police, Randy finally spoke during a second interview. However, he denied any involvement in the murder, saying that Curtis committed the crime and that Joshua assisted him. Joshua, meanwhile, chose not to cooperate with the investigation. In October 1996, the police received 2 conflicting confessions. They decided to believe Randy's story, especially since he had passed a lie detector test. According to Randy, he had planned to go out drinking with his friends Curtis and Joshua that night. Randy later learned that Heather was supposed to be joining them. Heather knew Joshua and Randy, but had never met Curtis, so she had no idea he could be dangerous. That night, everyone drank a lot of alcohol, and Heather gradually lost consciousness. In her drunken state, Curtis harassed her and tried to attack her. Although she could barely speak, Curtis was afraid that when she woke up, she would remember what had happened. Knowing that rape was a serious crime that could result in a prison sentence, Curtis suggested that Heather be eliminated to avoid consequences. Randy thought he was joking, but he was serious. Curtis took a handgun from his car and aimed it at everyone present. Joshua and Randy understood the danger they were in, so they chose not to resist. They put the intoxicated Heather in the trunk of Joshua's car and drove towards Curtis's house. Before they arrived, Curtis led them across a bridge where Heather's body was later discovered. Curtis ordered the car to stop in the middle of the bridge and told them to pull Heather out of the trunk and place her near the railing. Fearing for their own safety, Joshua and Randy complied, but Heather was too intoxicated to stand. They left her on the ground. Curtis approached Heather and began shooting at close range. Randy saw a large hole appear in Heather's skull and instinctively covered his eyes, not wanting to see any more. Curtis unloaded all his bullets on her. Curtis and Joshua then dumped her off the bridge and drove away. Randy said they were horrified by what they had just witnessed and the extent of the cruelty Curtis had inflicted on Heather. They decided to remain silent out of fear for their own lives. In October 1996, Randy Wood, Joshua Luke Bagwell, and Curtis Allen Gamble were charged with the kidnapping and murder of 16-year-old Heather. Of the three, Joshua was the most difficult to deal with because he would not confess, remained silent, and there was virtually no evidence against him. The prosecutor had to rely on the testimony of Randy and Curtis, but their testimony was inconsistent. To resolve this problem, the prosecutor offered Randy a deal. He had to testify against Joshua in exchange for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 30 years. Randy quickly accepted the offer. On October 15, Curtis agreed to a plea deal that could have resulted in life imprisonment without parole. However, while in prison awaiting trial, Curtis assaulted a security guard, knocking him down and attempting to choke him before other guards intervened. Nearly a year and a half after Heather's death. In February 1998, Joshua's trial began. The defense made numerous attempts to justify the actions of those involved in the crime. The attorneys sought to discredit Heather by portraying her as an alcoholic and a womanizer, claiming that she had an inappropriate relationship with Curtis and that she had begun to threaten others. They argued that this behavior motivated Curtis to choose to eliminate her. Heather's parents defended their daughter, insisting that Heather was a talented athlete and a good person. She accidentally went with a bad group of friends and met a criminal. The floor was unexpectedly given to Curtis, he reiterating his claim that Joshua had nothing to do with the crime and had no knowledge of the planned murder. He claimed that Randy was the one who shot Heather. In a surprising turn of events, Randy refused to take the plea deal. He did not want his confession to be seen as an attempt to save himself and put others at risk. In court, he stated that he wanted to seek justice for Heather, despite his attorney advising him not to. Although this noble choice put him at risk of the death penalty, it left a strong impression on Heather's parents, who later met with Randy in person to discuss the situation. On February 14, Randy took the stand before the jury, sharing his account of the tragic events of that night, and the jury believed him completely. Randy described how Joshua had participated in Heather's murder along with Curtis, and also detailed Curtis's role in covering up the crime. That day, Curtis was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder, resulting in a sentence of life in prison plus 99 years. On May 8, Heather's and Randy's parents met during a live broadcast. Despite their deep sorrow over their loss, they were struck by the honesty of the Randy and the genuine remorse he showed. On August 7, 1998, Randy Wood's trial ended, and he was found guilty of murdering the Heather, receiving a life sentence with the chance of parole after 40 years. Many people were upset by this verdict, as Randy was the only one who demonstrated remorse and risked his own safety to tell the truth. Many felt that he did not deserve such a severe punishment. Joshua was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was placed in the same correctional facility as Curtis, In January 2002, both men made a bold escape at night and evaded capture for 10 days while hiding in Texas, prompting a national alert. Eventually, they were caught and returned to prison. In his opening speech, Prosecutor Gustavo stated that he would seek a life sentence for Juan. There were several reasons for this decision, the most important of which was that Rosalia had been in an unequal relationship with him. Juan not only controlled her, but also dominated her in social relationships. Furthermore, he has consistently failed to acknowledge their common child, Alma. Therefore, the punishment Gustavo proposed, that is, life imprisonment, was entirely appropriate to the extent of the damage Juan had caused to all members of Rosalia's family. Caroline Walker, the lawyer representing Rosalia's family, criticized the authorities for their initial response when Rosalia was reported missing. She noted that the authorities were initially not proactive in searching for Rosalia and did not take the case seriously. Additionally, she stressed that Rosalia's remains were not discovered by law enforcement officers, but were found by two hunters. She also said that in her opinion, a police officer informed Juan about the investigation. This led to some important information being leaked, which could have helped him disappear just before his arrest. The trial lasted about a month and featured around 100 expert testimonies. Details of the phone calls between Rosalia and Juan on the day of her disappearance were also presented. It was revealed that he made the last call shortly after she left the bar, and her phone was turned off soon after. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar white car near the bar that evening. Juan was also seen leaving the house around 9:00 p.m., and a while later he came back. Prosecutors argued that this brief time frame was sufficient for him to commit the crime and dispose of the evidence. Additionally, another important piece of evidence was geolocation data from the phones, which showed that Juan and Rosalia's phones were in close proximity for a period of time. The prosecution delivered a strong closing argument, presenting both direct and indirect evidence that confirmed Juan Valdez's guilt in the crime. They firmly believed that Rosalia's life was ended due to a violent act by he, although the exact cause of death was not determined. But forensic experts believed that she could have died from a severe blow to the left cheekbone. Juan also had the opportunity to defend himself. He attempted to dispute all the evidence presented by the authorities, particularly denying allegations that he intentionally damaged his mobile phone. Furthermore, Juan argued that the authorities had made a serious mistake by focusing on him, which had led to a failure to identify who had actually harmed Rosalia. On August 3, 2020, the much-awaited verdict was announced. The court found Juan Oscar Valdez guilty on all charges. He listened to his sentence with his eyes downcast. Outside the courtroom, many young people from various human rights organizations had gathered to show support for Rosalia's family and to follow the trial's progress. Shortly after the guilty verdict, Juan's lawyer filed an appeal against the trial court's decision. During the appeal, Juan's lawyer argued that the prosecution had not presented clear evidence to prove that Rosalia had actually gotten into Juan's car on the day she disappeared. Additionally, the lawyer also argued that Aldo, her last boyfriend, whom she had accused of sexual assault, was the one people should suspect. The defense also stressed that the fact that Juan had a daughter with Rosalia did not prove that he had a motive to commit a serious crime. The prosecution aimed to counter the arguments made by Juan's lawyer. They said that from the beginning of the investigation, they considered many theories, but all were discarded when the evidence pointed to Juan as the perpetrator. Caroline Walker, the lawyer representing Rosalia's family, agreed with the prosecution's position. On October 7, 2021, the Vera Court of Appeals issued a unanimous 3-judge decision. They did not accept the appeal and request to overturn the sentence that Juan's lawyer had filed. Therefore, the previous judgment of the trial court, according to which Juan was sentenced to life in prison, remained in place. In addition, the prosecutor's office was asked to conduct an internal investigation into the misconduct of some of the police officers involved. Rosalia's case became a symbol of solidarity and feminist movements in the northern province of Santa Fe. It highlighted the issue of gender violence in local media and sparked discussions during political debates. Although Rosalia's family achieved justice, it did not erase their pain. The case of Sierra Halseth. Sierra was a sweet young girl who loved spending time with her father, taking lots of pictures together. However, she burned those pictures and ran away with her boyfriend. She later blamed her father for everything, claiming that he had abused her. But was her words true? If so, why had no one heard of them before? Here is the full story of Sierra Halseth, her sudden change in behavior, and the tragic death of Daniel Halseth. Daniel Halseth was born in January 1976. He earned his bachelor's degree in music from Western Oregon University, where he was known for his drumming skills. He then pursued a degree in business with the goal of becoming a successful businessman, and he eventually achieved that goal. At the age of 20, he met Elizabeth, the youngest woman ever elected to the Nevada State Senate. They got married in March 2001, which led Daniel to move to Nevada. The couple had 3 children, Dana, Jordan, and Sierra. They settled in Las Vegas because Daniel found a job there, but the family was not happy for a long time. 10 years after their wedding, Daniel and Elizabeth divorced. In October 2011, Daniel was arrested after Elizabeth accused him of trying to force her to have sex, even though they were still legally married. A month later, he filed for divorce, accusing Elizabeth of cheating on him. Sierra's siblings were still young when their parents divorced, but the family's troubles continued. Daniel and Elizabeth both remarried quickly. Despite this, Daniel and his ex-wife Elizabeth maintained their relationship for the sake of their children, and even maintained a joint bank account. However, due to the constant instability, Elizabeth began a custody battle that lasted until Sierra started high school. Eventually, Dana and Jordan moved in with Elizabeth, while Sierra stayed with Daniel. The father and daughter have a close bond, and Daniel often shares photos of him and Sierra having fun together on social media, showing his love for his youngest daughter. In June 2020, Sierra began dating 18-year-old Aaron Guerrero, who was 2 years her senior. Unlike typical high school relationships, their relationship progressed quickly. They began making alarming plans for the future, including robbing their parents and running away to California. Both sets of parents quickly noticed negative changes in Sierra and Aaron's behavior, fearing that the situation would worsen if the kids spent time together. Unfortunately, the parents' worries and concerns led the couple to make poor choices. By Christmas 2020, Aaron and Sierra's families decided that the young couple should stop dating, and they were officially banned from dating. While it may seem like Sierra and Aaron are following their parents' wishes, that is not the case. Sierra and Aaron quietly waited for the right moment to carry out their plan of revenge against their families. Their goal was to eliminate their parents who had hindered their relationship. On December 16, 2020, Sierra's father, Daniel, wrote a heartfelt post for her birthday, expressing his love for her. He shared that when he was 9 years old, he dreamed of having a big family and always wanted to be a great father. He expressed his happiness that he had fulfilled that dream, especially because he had Sierra. Little did he know that Sierra was plotting to kill him at the time. On April 3, 2021, Daniel shared an old video online of him and his daughter having fun together, saying that they were enjoying their time. 5 days later, Sierra ran away from home. That same day, another unusual thing happened. $1,300 was withdrawn from her parents' joint bank account without any notice. Elizabeth found this strange because Daniel would never withdraw such a large amount of money without informing her. Elizabeth sent Daniel a text message, but he did not respond all day. By this point, many people, including Elizabeth and his mother, Christina, were worried because Daniel had stopped answering his phone. Elizabeth then texted her daughter, Sierra, to ask how Daniel was doing. Surprisingly, Sierra replied that Daniel's phone was broken, but he was fine. However, Daniel's family grew increasingly concerned. They knew he could use his laptop to communicate, and if his phone was broken, he could fix it quickly. Daniel regularly posting videos on Instagram and sharing his thoughts on Twitter with many followers. His mother was aware of this, so his sudden silence was concerning to her. She asked a family friend to check if Daniel was at home. The family friend contacted Sierra to find out where her father was. Sierra replied that he was in the shower. The friend then asked why Daniel wasn't answering his phone. Sierra explained that her phone was broken. She assured the family friend that she would have her father call back from another phone as soon as he finished showering. However, that didn't happen, and the next day, Sierra stopped answering calls and texts. Christina's increasingly concerned when Sierra did not respond to her texts. Concerned, she decided to call her niece, but Sierra only said that her father was in the shower. In a fit of rage, Christina threatened to call the police, causing Sierra to stop answering her phone altogether. That day, surveillance footage showed Daniel's blue Nissan leaving the area, causing Christina to become even more concerned. She continued to call on Wednesday, debating whether to contact the police or have Peggy and Joey come over. Eventually, Sierra stopped answering her phone altogether. Meanwhile, Joey and Peggy, Daniel's landlords and close friends, were on their way, but they informed Christina that it would take a few hours for them to arrive because they were out of town. Christina was so worried that she decided to call 911 to report that her son, Daniel, had been missing for 2 days. Daniel had been absent from work, and friends and family had been unable to reach him. Christina noted that Daniel was not usually like this. He lived with his daughter, who was also not returning calls or texts. The most worrying detail was that money had been withdrawn from Daniel's account at 3 different ATMs. Police were then dispatched to the address, but Joe and Peggy had already arrived. When Joey and Peggy arrived at Daniel's house, they found the front door open and Daniel's car gone. They cautiously walked inside and immediately smelled a strong smell of smoke. They searched every room in the house, but found only the remains of a fire. There was no sign of Daniel. However, things took a turn for the worse when they entered the garage. In the middle of the garage, they saw a sleeping bag with something inside. Upon inspection, they discovered Daniel's body, burned beyond recognition. Joey quickly called the police and told them they were the homeowners. They had just arrived and discovered that a fire had broken out in the house 2 days earlier. Joey also mentioned that he had seen a body in a sleeping bag in the garage. A few minutes later, the police arrived at their address. During their investigation, they confirmed that Daniel, 45, had been brutally murdered. The forensic team discovered a significant amount of shocking evidence in Daniel's home. First, they found a chainsaw carelessly left on the living room floor. In the kitchen, there was another saw with blood smeared along its edge, and 2 knives were found in the sink. The police also located a receipt from a store and an ATM. Despite signs of a fire in the living room and the bloody saw in the kitchen, it was evident that someone had made serious efforts to clean the house. Daniel's autopsy revealed a gruesome scene. He had suffered 70 slash wounds. Most of these injuries were to his head, neck, and torso. His body, burned beyond recognition, was stuffed into a sleeping bag and moved to the garage. Police concluded that the person responsible for Daniel's death harbored intense hatred, as evidenced by the brutal stabbing and beating he endured. After he died, the attacker even burned his body in the living room. When the police spoke to the family, it was clear that there were no obvious suspects. No one could understand why Daniel had such a vicious enemy. However, Christina noted that Sierra had been acting very strangely. When asked about Daniel's situation, she always replied that her father was taking a shower, and then Sierra stopped contacting Christina completely. Additionally, Sierra had gone missing from the house. On April 9, police received a tip that led them to a receipt from a local store and access to surveillance camera footage. They discovered that Aaron had purchased a saw and gloves. That same day, Sierra was seen in the footage leaving the store with 2 bottles of bleach, using Daniel's credit card to make the purchase. Police quickly gathered information about Aaron. They learned that both families had forbidden Aaron and Sierra from seeing each other, so he ran away from home on April 8. With the addition of surveillance footage, police had enough evidence to issue arrest warrants for them. On April 13, police arrested Sierra and Aaron 400 miles from their home in Salt Lake City, Utah, for not paying their bus fare. When police conducted a background check, they discovered that the couple was wanted for murder. Additionally, police discovered Daniel's blue Nissan, the car Sierra and Aaron had used to get away. Inside the trunk, they found a bloody blanket. Police seized Sierra and Aaron's phones as evidence. They examined the contents and found a disturbing video on Sierra's phone. In the video, Sierra and Aaron talked about killing Daniel without showing any remorse. After Sierra and Aaron were arrested in Utah, they were taken to the Clark County Detention Center in Nevada. The investigation at the crime scene revealed that Sierra and Aaron intended to dismember Daniel, as a chainsaw and a handsaw were discovered in the house and had been recently purchased for that purpose. As a result, Sierra and Aaron face multiple charges, including murder, arson, conspiracy to commit robbery, and 4 counts of fraudulent use of a credit or debit card. On June 15, 2021, Sierra and Aaron pleaded not guilty at their initial hearing. The case has attracted attention, especially because Sierra seems to have no remorse for her actions against her father. Many were shocked by her seeming indifference. Sierra's defense said her parents' divorce and the long custody battle had a significant impact on Sierra. The therapist then explained that this type of trauma can significantly disrupt a child's development. If Sierra had previously experienced emotional trauma, any change or loss could have added to her feelings of despair. Daniel's family has stated that Sierra and Aaron's complete lack of remorse is reprehensible and inexcusable. They expect justice to be served in the most serious manner. They loved Daniel deeply and miss him. This will be their only statement. In May 2022, Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero agreed to a plea deal. However, it is unclear whether the couple truly felt remorse or whether they agreed to the plea deal in exchange for a lighter sentence. The judge sentenced Sierra and Aaron to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. This was part of the deal they made when they pleaded guilty to murder and other charges. After 22 years, they could be released around the age of 40, which would give them a chance to start over. After the verdict, Daniel's mother, Christina, spoke to the press, expressing her grief. Christina said that Sierra had shown no remorse for the murder she had committed. In fact, during the trial, Sierra tried to blame Daniel, claiming that she had been forced into the act. Sierra said that her father had assaulted her, pinned her down, and beat her. However, Christina pointed out that Sierra could have reported the incident to the police, but instead chose a different and more tragic course of action. In a surprising turn of events, Aaron was the only one to apologize for his actions. He sought forgiveness from Daniel's family, who noticed that Aaron showed remorse and emotion, unlike Sierra. The case of Lydia Guardo. Raymond Guardo married Jacqueline in 1956. In the early years of their marriage, they had 2 children, a son named Bruno and a daughter named Nadia. At first, their family appeared to be typical and happy. However, after Nadia's birth, Raymond was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. While Raymond was in prison, his wife Jacqueline began an affair with another man and became pregnant. When she was allowed to visit him in prison, she informed him that the child was not his. Despite this, he tolerated his wife's infidelity and expressed his desire to adopt the child. Soon, on November 13, 1960, the girl was born, named Lydia Guardo. Years later, Raymond was released from prison, but his relationship with his wife, Jacqueline, has worsened. She was left alone to care for their 3 children and seemed to have little affection for them. So she decided to send her children to an orphanage, and soon after, her children were adopted by a family. Fortunately, the children were placed with a loving family that provided them with everything they needed to begin a new chapter in their lives. With this support, Bruno, the oldest child, always held on to the hope that his biological parents would come for him and his younger sisters. He even encouraged his sisters to believe that this would happen one day. While still in prison, Raymond saw an advertisement in the newspaper for a woman named Lucienne Ulpat, who was seeking a pen pal. After his release, he found Lucienne and soon married her. Following the marriage, he became determined to reclaim his children by any means. One night, he took a gun and broke into the home of the family that was taking care of his children. The noise frightened the girls. Nadia didn't remember what her father, Raymond, looked like, and Lydia had never seen him before. They thought he might be a kidnapper and were worried that they might be in danger. Raymond successfully took the children from their foster family and placed them in his car, despite their threats to call the police. After several hours of driving, he brought the children to his home, where he introduced them to Lucienne, telling them that she was their new mother and that they would need to follow her rules. During the first years of living together, everything seemed quite stable, at least judging by family photos from the time. The family moved to a new house in a quiet neighborhood. Raymond received a cash allowance and started his own business, which focused on instant postcard printing and various office tasks. Lucienne occasionally worked in his company, but primarily handled office work. However, as time passed, the family's life began to change dramatically. The children suffered abuse from their father, Raymond, and stepmother, Lucienne. Lydia's first memory from this period was witnessing Raymond beat Bruno for playing with a neighbor's child. When Raymond and Lucienne went to work, they hired young girls to care for the children. Upon returning home, he would pressure these girls to drink alcohol with him. On one occasion, he even attempted to persuade one of the girls to have sex, but she managed to escape. The girl's father then came to the house to confront Raymond and seriously injured him. After that incident, Raymond stopped hiring nannies. Later, he bought a trailer to take his family on vacation to the beach. Once they arrived, they spent time swimming and relaxing like other vacationers. However, an unsettling event occurred. While in the water, Raymond approached his daughter, Nadia, and pressed her against him inappropriately. She struggled to escape his grip, but this only made things worse. From that point on, she became the target of Raymond's abuse. Lydia recalls one day, she heard Nadia's cries coming from the trailer. This marked the beginning of Raymond's sexual abuse of one of his daughters. After that, parents, Raymond and Lucienne, often beat and do other terrible things to their children. Bruno and Nadia stopped going to elementary school, while Lydia, who had never been to school, faced severe mistreatment. This may have been because she was not Raymond's biological daughter. A few years later, around 1971, when Lydia was over 8 years old, the bullying began to get worse. The first incident occurs when Lucienne gets angry because Lydia comes home dirty after playing outside. Her stepmother, Lucienne, put her in a bathtub filled with boiling water and bleach. She recalls that her sensitive skin began to peel and float to the surface of the water. Hearing her screams, Raymond rushed into the bathroom, pulled she out, and laid her on the bed. He attempted to treat her burns with vegetable oil, but soon realized the injuries were severe. Then, she was taken to the hospital, and doctors determined she had third-degree burns. So that Lucienne wouldn't be responsible for the incident, Raymond blamed the city government for providing too hot water. Meanwhile, Lydia was transferred to the intensive care unit and then to the burns unit at the Lion City Hospital, where she remained for several months. She also underwent several skin grafts. Raymond is always by Lydia's side, not because he was a good father, but just to keep her from sharing the incident with others. Eventually, he grew weary of the situation and declared that he would take she home to continue her treatment. Medical professionals were against this decision, but Raymond secured the support of their family doctor, who wrote a confirming that he would continue to treat Lydia. Consequently, Raymond picked Lydia up and carried her out of the burn unit. Back home, Raymond begins to take care of Lydia. He regularly changed her dressings and started to touch her inappropriately. One day, he came home with a camera, claiming he needed to take pictures for the insurance company. He first photographed Lydia, asking her to smile, and then took pictures of her private areas. He then told the girl that the family doctor had prescribed this medicine. He forced her to inhale that drug, leaving her in a semi-conscious state. Although she was aware that he was about to do something strange and painful, she was unable to resist. At that time, he was sexually assaulting she. During this time, Raymond's wife, Lucienne, did not intervene. Instead, she encouraged his behavior. For 9 years, Lydia came to see what was happening as normal. She believed her father, Raymond, loved her, which led her to think there was nothing wrong with his actions. Years later, in an interview with a French television show, Lydia explained how Raymond justified his horrific actions. He told his children that he was doing this for their well-being. He also claimed that, as their father, he had the right to do so. In 1975, the Guardo family moved to the village of Coulombe, about 40 kilometers from Paris. At their new home, Raymond and Lucienne continued to abuse their children. The teenagers still did not attend school and had very little contact with the outside world. After returning to work, Raymond managed to get permission to park his printing van at a shopping center. To attract attention, he displayed photos of Lydia's burned legs on the van. Next to the photos, there were posters announcing that Lydia's injuries were due to the negligence of the authorities, and that they had yet to compensate her. Thus, he created the image of a father, calling for public attention and justice. When he felt that the photos alone weren't enough, Raymond forced Lydia to accompany him so that people could see her scars. He used the sympathy of bystanders to sell his goods and make money. Bruno was the first to try to stop the abuse from Raymond and Lucienne. Before that, Bruno, Nadia, and Lydia tried to escape, but they were caught and punished. Despite this, Bruno, who had suffered years of physical abuse, eventually managed to escape. According to some sources, Bruno contacted the authorities to report his family's problem. However, the authorities did not take his claims seriously. Meanwhile, his younger sisters, Nadia and Lydia, continued to suffer from Raymond's behavior. As they grew older, their bodies began to change. Noticing this, Raymond bandaged his daughters' chests with elastic bandages, making it difficult for them to breathe. The bandages eventually became tattered and dirty, as he did not allow them to be removed for months. He did not want anyone other than himself to touch his daughters. Years later, Bruno returned to rescue his sister Nadia, who was now an adult. He successfully saved her, but Lydia remained in danger. Raymond confined her to the dark, damp attic, where he abused her multiple times a day. She felt betrayed by her siblings for leaving her behind. She tried to escape from home several times, but Raymond spread rumors that she was mentally ill. So every time she tried to contact the authorities, they immediately brought her back home. After another escape attempt, Raymond even chained her up to keep her from fleeing again. When Lydia turned 18, Raymond decided it was time for her to have children. He was so determined to make this happen that after each intimate encounter, he would tie her legs together to supposedly increase the chances of her getting pregnant. At 19, she became pregnant for the first time, and for almost the entire 9 months of her pregnancy, she was kept on a leash. This was to prevent her from having an abortion. She gave birth to her first child on December 8, 1982. Despite becoming a mother, Lydia continued to try to escape, but Raymond caught her repeatedly and punished her harshly. On one occasion, he locked her in the attic for 6 months. During this time, she suffered abuse from Raymond and Lucienne, who often used kitchen utensils as weapons. The only companions she had were rats. She went on to have 5 more children between 1986 and 1996. Her youngest child, a boy named Rudy, is not Raymond's but someone else's, conceived while she was trying to escape. Raymond took great pride in his children, who initially did not even know who their real mother was. Neighbors, grocery store owners, and authorities representatives all came to congratulate him on having a large family and pay their respects. Every time Lydia was ready to give birth, Raymond would take her to a hospital outside the border. There, with threats to kill her, he would force her to say that he was her husband and the father of her children. He was skilled at manipulating and she felt powerless to resist him. It all ended in 1999. Raymond, who was diabetic, began to suffer serious health issues due to his neglect of his well-being. One day, his condition deteriorated, resulting in the amputation of several toes on his left foot. After the surgery, he continued to ignore the doctor's advice, and his health condition worsened. One day, Lydia visited Raymond in the hospital and learned that he had died the night before from a pulmonary embolism. This news brought her to tears, as she seemed to forget all the pain he had caused her. Before the death of the man who had abused her for a long time, she could not understand why she felt so sad. As Lydia left the hospital, she recalled how Raymond once forced her to promise that she would end her life immediately after his death. Years of his control had deeply affected her mindset. She walked to the nearest bridge and, in a moment of despair, jumped into the river. After she fell, she lost consciousness. Then, rescuers had pulled her from the water. In that moment, she realized that the horrors of her past were finally behind her. Thus, the 28-year saga of bullying, sexual assault, and imprisonment ended. She was free at last. After Lydia was released, she faced many challenges. As an illiterate and unemployed young woman, she needed to rebuild her life. She also had to reconnect with her children, who had been raised by Raymond and Lucienne without any contact with her. Fortunately, after years of neglecting the issue, the authorities began to support her. Initially, she was allowed to stay in the house where she had been held captive, although she was too afraid to go into the attic, the site of her abuse. Lydia's stepmother, Lucienne, who was 68 at the time, went to trial in 2007. She received a 3-year suspended sentence for failing to stop the crimes committed by Raymond. In 2008, this sentence was appealed and increased to 4 years probation. Lydia bravely shared her story with everyone. Despite still being illiterate, she collaborated with journalists and writer Jean-Michel Radem to publish a book about her difficult journey to freedom. In her book, Lydia criticized many government agencies. According to her, during the days when she escaped, they made her fall back into a bad situation without trying to understand the situation. She was especially critical of her stepmother, Lucienne, who not only ignored her suffering, but also actively participated in the physical abuse. She also criticized Bruno, Nadia, and medical workers who treated her injuries from burns, bruises, and cuts. She claims that medical staff ignored the obvious signs of her mistreatment and chose to remain uninvolved. Additionally, she criticizes her neighbors for not contacting any social services despite hearing the daily screams of children. Finally, Lydia expressed her disappointment with the French justice system for going easy on Lucienne. After publishing her book, the public became aware of the horrors she endured. Though some people advised her against sharing her story, she firmly believes that victims of such crimes should share their experiences, as it may help protect others. After gaining her freedom, Lydia met Sylvain Skurla. He seemed to come into her life to help heal her from the pain she had suffered. Shortly after they met, they got married and had 2 children. She expressed that she found hope in her husband and began to embrace life again. She participated in several media interviews and documentaries about her experiences, with Sylvain always by her side. However, the indelible traces of her time in captivity still remained in her heart. The scars on her body were a reminder of her past and the struggles she had gone through. With the help of a lawyer, Lydia appealed to the Judicial Commission for compensation. In her appeal, she detailed the torture and abuse she endured from Raymond and Lucienne, as well as her lack of access to education, which hindered her ability to find work. Additionally, she was not registered in the Social Security system because she could not write, preventing her from completing necessary forms. She also mentioned that burns she suffered as a child resulted in a degree of disability. Therefore, it was essential for Lydia to achieve several goals. First, to have her status as a victim recognized. Second, to receive financial assistance from the state to buy a home, ensuring she would never return to the place where she was tortured. On November 16, 2009, the Victims' Compensation Commission awarded Lydia over $100,000 in compensation. Her children, whom she had with Raymond, also received financial support. It was reported that they all found stable jobs, rebuilt their lives, and started their own families. Now, at 61 years old, Lydia has had a long and challenging journey to achieve a happy life. She needed specialized treatment for her emotional and physical scars for many years. However, with Sylvain's support, she was able to begin again. Despite everything she has gone through, she remains a strong and cheerful woman. Later, Lydia re-established communication with Bruno and Nadia. However, she admits that she still feels anger towards Bruno for not taking her with him. The case of Veronica Youngblood. 30 years old, Veronica Youngblood originally came from Argentina. The exact timing of her move to the United States is unclear, but she grew up in poverty. At the young age of 16, she gave birth to her first daughter, Sharon. At that time, she started working as a call girl to support herself and earn money. In 2007, she met Ronald Youngblood, a pilot in the U.S. Navy, who was one of her clients. They quickly started dating, and in 2009, they got married in Las Vegas. Marrying Ronald brought stability to Veronica's life, offering her a home, a supportive husband, and assistance in caring for her daughter. A few years later, in 2012, Veronica and Ronald welcomed a daughter together named Brooklyn. Sharon is described as a sweet and kind girl who is always willing to help others. She is currently in 10th grade at Octina High School and participates in figure skating. Coach Lynette Carroll, who has coached she for about 4 years, commented that she is a persistent and hard-working athlete who has performed well in competitions. Sharon was a good student with a bright future ahead of her. She often talks about her dream of becoming a singer and has a great group of friends, which makes her popular. Brooklyn, 5, is a smart, loving little girl who loves animals. She is adored by her family. However, the relationship between her parents, Veronica and Ronald, is strained. They often argued, which prompted the police to intervene. In 2014, while Ronald and his family were in Honduras, she called the local police to report that she and Ronald had a disagreement, during which he became physically violent. During this time, the family said Ronald began to suspect Veronica of having an affair. After that, their relationship deteriorated, and some people said he became more domineering, jealous, and possessive. They said that while in Honduras, he began denying his wife access to transportation, money, and even the internet. At one point, Veronica sought assistance from the U.S. Embassy to facilitate her emergency return to the United States, which was granted. After their time in Honduras, Ronald was assigned to the Navy Department in Washington, D.C., and they moved to Florida. There, They effectively separated, but continued to live together. Following their time in Florida, they relocated with their children to Oakton, Virginia, and began divorce proceedings. They continued to live in the same house though, possibly because they wanted to raise their two daughters together and because Veronica was unemployed, so could not afford to live independently. However, the divorce proceedings and child custody battle put further strain on their relationship. During this process, Veronica applied for student loans and named Ronald as a guarantor without his consent. This led to a number of disputes. By September 2016, the court decided that they could continue living together in Oakton and have joint custody of their daughter Brooklyn without either party having to pay alimony. In October 2016, Ronald filed for a protective order to protect himself from Veronica. He alleged that she took his phone and threw it in the toilet, poured water on his laptop, and scratched his car. As a result, the court ordered she to move out of their shared home and maintain a distance of 500 feet from Ronald and Brooklyn until a hearing, scheduled for 2 weeks later. The hearing was finalized on October 31, 2016, and the divorce was finalized. After the hearing, Veronica most likely moved back into the marital home because she and Ronald began living together again. Everything went smoothly until March 2018, when Ronald and Veronica failed to appear in court. They filed a joint consent form for a 14 years project that stated they both wanted to move to Sedalia, Missouri with their two daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, in August 2018. They chose Missouri because that's where most of Ronald's family lives. The agreement that the two signed and filed with the court stated that Veronica would be given her own apartment 30 miles away from Ronald's home, and that he would be responsible for paying rent for the next 3 years. During this period, they would share joint custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The court approved this arrangement, and the move was planned. However, on April 13, 2018, she changed her mind about moving, hired a new lawyer, and sought to change the custody agreement. She explained that her situation had changed since the initial agreement was filed. Veronica said she had gotten a good-paying job and would work full-time, but to do this, she needed to stay in Virginia. She also said that she was in the process of buying her own home so that she could live independently of Ronald without his support. In her revised request, she sought full custody of Brooklyn with the intention of letting their daughter live with her. The dispute between Ronald and Veronica was adjudicated in July 2018. The decision was made that there was no change. Both parties still had to move to Missouri as previously agreed. By August 2018, the judge refused to change the decision, and both parties signed this document to agree. 10 days later, Ronald notified the court of his new address in Missouri, where he planned to move in mid-August 2018. Sadly, this move would never take place. On August 5, 2018, 911 operator Jennifer Hoffman received a call from a 15-year-old girl who was crying out in pain. Sharon pleaded for help, saying she has just been attacked. When Jennifer asked who attacked her, she responded, her mother, Veronica. Sharon said her mother came into room while she and her younger sister, Brooklyn, were sleeping. Her mother said she was going to take her to God, then attacked her. Jennifer tried to reassure Sharon, informing her that help was on the way and to stay calm. However, Jennifer then heard the girl screaming and moaning in pain, repeatedly pleading. She said she didn't want to die. Please help her. Finally, in the evening, the rescue team arrived at the apartment on Lincoln Street. They found Sharon alive with 2 wounds, one in the back and one in the chest. Tragically, her little sister Brooklyn was discovered dead in her bed due to injury to the head. At the same time, Brooklyn was found dead in bed from a head wound. Sharon was still alive at the time, but in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, she did not survive. She fought bravely, but died just a few days later. When police arrived at the scene, they did not find Ronald or Veronica. Later that evening, they located Veronica. She went to a friend's house and knocked on the door with a gun in her hand. Her friend called 911, leading to her swift detention. Upon her arrest, officers discovered she still had the gun with her and was driving a rental car. The police also found 2 ammunition magazines for the weapon. During her interrogation just a few hours later, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun with plans to kill her daughters, Ronald and Veronica. Then she will die too. She mentioned that she was unhappy with her life, but did not elaborate further. The police later learned that immediately after the shootings, she called Ronald to inform him that she had killed their daughters, and she intended to die as well, adding that she hated him. During the police interrogation, Veronica confessed to her guilt. When the investigator asked what punishment she thought she deserved, she stated it should be the death penalty. Although Virginia has abolished the death penalty, the officers present during the interrogation noted that she spoke in a flat, emotionless manner throughout. As a result, she was charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of her 2 children. At her initial court hearing, she indicated that she did not require a public defender and did not want to hire a private attorney. However, eventually, she hired a lawyer. And at her plea hearing, she pleaded guilty, citing insanity. Veronica delayed each court hearing in her case. The next hearing was pushed back for several months because she repeatedly refused to leave prison to attend. Ultimately, the murder trial began in March 2023. Recently, the prosecution argued that she was not insane. Instead, they claimed she had carefully planned the murders of her daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn, as revenge against her ex-husband, Ronald. The murder occurred just days before Brooklyn and Ronald moved to Missouri. Veronica had just gone through a difficult divorce and was trying to get revenge. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline, demonstrating the premeditation behind the crimes. 9 days before the murders, Veronica attended a local gun show and purchased a gun. Prosecutors allege she did this with the intention of killing both her daughters, Sharon and Brooklyn. On the day before the shootings, Sharon asked Veronica if her mother had planned to kill her and Brooklyn, and if so, that would be horrible. The prosecution contended that Veronica had been plotting the murders for several days. On the day of the crime, they claimed she gave both children chewing gum laced with sleeping pills to incapacitate them. She then went into each room and attacked each of his daughters. During the investigation, it was discovered that Veronica had attacked Brooklyn in the head, causing her instant death. For Sharon, after the first attack, little girl woke up and started screaming. She asked her mother why she had shot her, and her mother replied that little girl was going to see God. Veronica then struck her again in the chest and left the apartment. Finally, Veronica called Ronald and left a voice message saying, "She killed Brooklyn, she killed Sharon, and she will die. She hates him. Goodbye." The prosecution alleged that Veronica was a liar and a manipulator. They said she caused chaos and shirked responsibility for her own gain. They described her as cruel, selfish, vengeful, and calculating. They claimed that she planned and executed the murder plot to get revenge on her ex-husband, Ronald. The defense, on the other hand, argued that she was suffering from psychological problems. They said she had been abused by a cruel man who had physically and mentally abused her. The defense claimed that Ronald never loved her and that she had suffered abuse since childhood. The lawyers again pointed to the poverty that Veronica and her younger sister lived in. They said she had suffered abuse from her grandfather and daily beatings from her parents, to the point where she was at one point unable to walk. Her father would often beat her with tree branches, belts, and brooms. After years of living in such cruel conditions, her parents abandoned she and her younger sister without a word, leaving them to fend for themselves. Then, Veronica was forced to turn to sex work to provide for her daughter and support her sister. During the proceedings, her younger sister gave a statement in which mentions that since childhood, she has followed a South American religion called Umbanda. This religion believes in the existence of a supreme creator, the ability to communicate with the spirits of the dead, and the concept of reincarnation, spiritual growth, through various practices. The defense used this information to argue that Veronica believed she had the ability to communicate with the dead. The defense argued that Veronica had suffered abuse and neglect in her past, and that in addition to these factors, she suffered from severe mental illness. She reported having heard voices throughout her life. At trial, she claimed that she had heard voices that night, leading her to believe that she had to kill her daughters. The defense argued that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. They asserted that she was terrified that her children would experience the same abuse she endured as a child if they were separated from her. Veronica's defense team said she went to the police and asked for the death penalty. This shows that she intends to die. During the trial, the case of Diana Garnica. On Saturday, May 6, 2017, a 17-year-old girl named Diana Garnica went out to meet her 40-year-old neighbor, Dario Suarez. As the day drew to a close, Diana did not return home. Her mother became concerned and tried to contact her, but was unable to reach her. After speaking with Dario, who gave no information about their encounter and claimed that he had not seen Diana that day, her mother became increasingly suspicious. Diana Garnica was born on March 30, 2000, in Argentina. Those who knew her, including friends and family, noted that she displayed maturity beyond her years. Diana was very responsible and enjoyed helping her family. A diligent student, she did well in school, but eventually had to drop out of school to help her family during the financial crisis. She made the difficult choice to drop out of school to find a job and help her parents. In addition, Diana has a boyfriend her own age. People also comment on her ability to protect herself. She knows how to keep her distance from rude or dangerous people. Diana is very friendly and is the second child in a family of 8 siblings. Later, her parents divorced, which was especially difficult for her, as she had deep feelings for her father. However, she maintained a close relationship with her mother. After the divorce, Diana's mother moved with all the children to a town in Alderates, Tucumán province. After settling into their new home, they got to know their closest neighbors, Dario Suarez and his family. Susana, Diana's mother, and her siblings formed a strong friendship with Dario's family, and they became so close that they treated each other like family. Susana often babysat Dario's children while they were away. Dario respected and loved Diana's family and treated her with great care, like his own sister. There was never any indication that Dario had inappropriate behavior towards Diana or her family, reflecting the deep trust and understanding between the two families. Diana went to work every morning and came home in the evening. Occasionally, she met members of her church community and spent time with her boyfriend and close friends. Unlike many girls her age, Diana did not like to dance and avoided discos and nightclubs. Those who knew her realized that she preferred to spend her free time at home. On May 6, 2017, Diana finished her work as usual and waited for her sister at the designated place so they could go home together, just like they did every day. When Diana got home, her neighbor Dario called her and asked if they could meet to buy an air conditioner as a surprise for his mother. He asked her to keep it a secret. However, after hanging up, Diana went to her mother's room and excitedly recounted the whole conversation, ignoring Dario's request to keep it a secret. She found it funny because it was still a long way from summer. In May, where she lived, the weather was quite cool and sometimes even cold. At that time, Diana did not suspect anything unusual and just told her mother that she would help Dario choose a gift. Diana had a very close relationship with her family and shared everything with them. On that unfortunate day, Dario sent Diana several text messages. He reminded her about the gift for her mother and emphasized that no one in her family should know about it, not her mother, father, siblings, or anyone else. Dario also asked Diana to keep their motorbike trip a secret. However, Diana read all of his messages, but chose not to keep it a secret. She told her mother, Zuzana, everything. As a result, her mother was fully informed about the scheduled meeting between Diana and Dario. Diana left the house to wait for Dario at the bus stop. Hours passed, and finally, Dario returned home. Zuzana heard the sound of his motorbike and went out to check. Seeing Dario alone, she assumed that Diana had chosen to walk home alone. She thought that Dario's wife might be jealous. Therefore, Zuzana decided to wait a little longer, hoping that her daughter would come home soon. Time passed, and the girl still did not return. Worried, Zuzana went to see Dario to ask about Diana's whereabouts. Dario quickly claimed that he did not know where she was, saying that he had not seen her that day. This answer made Zuzana feel strange and suspicious because she knew that her daughter was supposed to meet Dario. Although he denied it, Dario offered to help by suggesting that he could use his motorbike to find Diana, assuming that she had just gone out for a walk. Diana's relatives called her several times, but soon realized that it was useless. She had left her phone at home while it was charging and could not answer any calls or messages. They decided to check her text message history and found every text message that Dario had sent to Diana that day. It was learned that Dario had asked Diana to help him buy a gift for his mother, which suggested that they had indeed met. One of Diana's brothers then decided to confront Dario about these messages, hoping to get him to admit that Diana was with him. When Dario noticed one of Diana's brothers approaching his house, he fled. Diana's father, who was divorced from her mother and lived on his own, learned of her disappearance and quickly arrived at the scene. The entire family then went to the police for assistance. At the police station, Diana's relatives explained in detail what had happened and showed several text messages that implicated Dario in their daughter's disappearance. For the family, Dario was the only suspect. However, the police dismissed their concerns and did not take their complaint seriously. Instead, they suggested that the family look for common gathering places for young people. Diana's parents were disappointed with the police response and insisted that if their daughter went anywhere, it was only between home and work, occasionally going to church. They believed that there were only a few places where she could have gone. In addition, the family was certain that on that day, she had met her neighbor Dario, but he had returned without her and had begun to avoid them. Despite this information, the police informed Diana's relatives that they could not file a missing person report because they did not have enough personnel and resources to search for her. They advised the family to go to another police station with patrols to begin the search immediately. However, as the family left the station feeling hopeless, they were surprised to see a patrol car parked at the entrance with 7 police officers nearby, relaxing and chatting. The problem was that they had the resources to conduct a search for the missing Diana, but they chose not to. Considering the situation, Diana's family decided to continue looking for Dario, who had tried to run away. They went to the brick factory where Dario was supposed to work. When Diana's father got out of the car, he noticed that Dario's entire family had gathered near the factory building for some unknown reason. This was unusual, especially since it was 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Inside the factory, the lights were still on and the kilns were still running, even though they had not been used for months. Diana's father asked Dario's family where he was. They replied that he had gone to the toilet. However, Diana's relatives soon discovered that Dario had actually gone deep into the mountains and had no intention of returning. Diana's family tried to talk to his wife and mother. Unfortunately, no one could provide any information about Dario's situation. Diana's family was suspicious and asked questions. Why was Dario's entire family at the factory that night if none of them knew what had happened? Why was the factory, which had been shut down for a long time, suddenly operating early on a Sunday morning? Frustrated, Diana's family approached the judiciary and tried to file a complaint with the prosecutor's office. They expressed their concerns by going to the police the day before, and the police assured them that information about Diana's disappearance would be passed on to the prosecutor's office. However, when they arrived, no one at the office knew about the situation, possibly because no official statement had been filed. As a result, the family had to start the complaint process all over again. After filing a new complaint, Prosecutor Claudio Bonari went to the scene of the incident. Claudio instinctively sensed that something was amiss, so he quickly began organizing searches. He started at the home of the suspect, Dario Suarez, and then moved to the brick factory where Dario worked. The prosecutor discovered that the factory's kiln had been operating the night before, which raised some disturbing thoughts. Claudio later reported that he faced unexpected challenges during the investigation that day. The judges from the investigative court and his office secretary were not present, which prevented them from issuing a search warrant in time. Prosecutor Claudio therefore decided to conduct searches without the necessary warrant. He began his investigation by searching Dario's home and the factory. The prosecutor's main theory was that Dario might have kidnapped Diana and assaulted her. According to this theory, the factory could be the crime scene where Dario dumped the body. However, the prosecutor also considered the possibility that Dario did not act alone. He suspected that other people, including Dario's wife, mother, factory owner, and employees who were present that night, might have been involved in the crime. A second investigation was launched. The theory was that Diana might have been kidnapped and possibly handed over to the mafia or human traffickers. This theory did not come about by accident. In fact, in Diana's family, it was discovered that Dario was involved with very dangerous people who kidnapped young girls to then sell them or transfer them to bars and nightclubs. A girl on Facebook claimed that a man named Christian had handed Diana over to a human trafficking group. She detailed on her personal page how Diana was put in a nice car and mentioned an envelope of money that was supposed to be for Christian. However, this so-called witness later confessed that she had lied to blame her ex-boyfriend for everything after he left her. This situation required the prosecutors and their team to thoroughly review the documents they had for the investigation. As a result, significant resources were wasted on this false lead, hindering the actual investigation. Meanwhile, Prosecutor Claudio chose to pursue the case under the hypothesis of illegal detention and possible murder. His main theory was supported by the efforts of sniffer dogs who searched the area, as well as firefighters from Punta Arena, who assisted in the police-led searches and raids. The dogs repeatedly followed Diana's scent, leading them in the same direction. This gave them a clear path that she would have taken that day. The path started from Diana's house, then to Dario's house, and continued from there to the brick factory. The police therefore focused their search on both Dario's house and the factory. At the factory, the dogs discovered a pendant with the letter D and a belt with traces of blood. During a search of the homes of Dario and his relatives, police confiscated their cell phones and examined their text message histories. A manuscript discovered at Dario's home confirmed that his relatives were involved in covering up the crime. Regarding the brick factory, the prosecutor conducted 3 searches there, believing that the final crucial evidence would be discovered to clarify what happened on May 6. Claudio was convinced that all the answers would be found at the site. Therefore, on May 13, the police, together with forensic experts, returned to the factory for the 3rd time in a week to re-examine the furnace that had attracted the dogs' attention. In the furnace, they found the remains of teeth and a piece of surgical steel. A month later, on June 18, Prosecutor Claudio informed the parties concerned of some disturbing news. The evidence found at the brick factory had mysteriously disappeared. As a result, the prosecutor declared the case secret, which meant that neither the parties concerned nor the media would receive any further updates. An internal investigation was launched involving 10 police officers. 7 were released while 3 faced charges. The case has been investigated in secret since then. There was speculation that the envelopes containing the evidence may have been damaged, leading to the loss of evidence. However, Prosecutor Claudio and Diana's family were not convinced by this explanation. They believed that those involved in their daughter's disappearance were powerful and dangerous people who could manipulate the situation to hide any information. Dario later turned himself in to the police. What was most surprising was that Dario arrived with a highly paid and clearly financially beyond his means private attorney. This was no ordinary attorney. He was a top specialist, often hired by the wealthy and influential. He was not a public defender, but someone with a proven track record of successfully defending clients involved in questionable activities. Dario arrived with this attorney, much to Diana's family's surprise. Everyone knew that Dario could not afford such legal representation. In fact, Diana's parents had struggled to raise enough money to hire an attorney to help investigate their daughter's case. Dario's ability to hire such an expensive attorney raised suspicions about his involvement in a serious situation and showed that he had connections with powerful people. Dario's lawyer ordered him to exercise his right to silence and confirm only what had already been proven by the accusing party. In particular, the text messages that he exchanged with Diana on the day of her disappearance. The lawyer also instructed that the initial evidence gathered by Prosecutor Claudio be dismissed, as the searches had been conducted without proper authorization. Of the 12 people initially suspected and detained in connection with the case, all were eventually released, leaving only Dario in custody. As there was no further evidence linking him to the crime beyond what had already been gathered, the police were unable to make any progress in solving the case or bring further charges. As a result, the investigation stalled, and Dario was eventually released on bail. In January 2018, after a series of disturbing events, Diana's sister was attacked by a woman. Diana's sister reported the incident to the police, who refused to accept her complaint. Like the initial complaint against Diana, this one failed to attract the attention of the police. Soon after, more puzzling events took place. Diana's family received small sums of cash from unidentified people on 3 separate occasions, accompanied by notes that appeared to have been written by Diana. These messages gave the family hope that she was still alive. One note read, "Mom, I'm Diana. I'm alive. They're holding me. Please come get me." Another message conveyed a similar plea. 3 banknotes were sent to a lab for analysis. 2 of them tested negative, showing that the handwriting did not match the notes in Diana's notebook. The 3rd banknote initially tested positive, showing that it matched Diana's handwriting. However, when retested, the results were negative, indicating that the handwriting was not hers. This case is indeed full of inexplicable details. First, the evidence found disappeared. Then these notes appeared. The identity of the handwriting remains unknown. The discovery of these notes has rekindled the family's hope for their daughter's return and led them to form new theories about her possible location. Diana's parents still believe she is alive, while they feel the police are unwilling to pursue her case. In May 2019, 2 years after Dario Suarez was arrested for a crime he was suspected of but had no evidence to prove, Dario was released under the Argentine Penal Code. 2 years and 4 months after Diana went missing, the federal court decided to close her case due to insufficient evidence. Currently, the main theory of the prosecution is that Diana was kidnapped and is likely the victim of violence and murder. Throughout the investigation, and searches were carried out at various locations, and many witnesses were interviewed, but no one provided clear information about what happened.